My jealous sister, Elena, announced her pregnancy at my son's first birthday and then had the audacity to hand me a baby shower to-do list. It was as if years of pent-up resentment had finally bubbled over, threatening to explode in a single moment. I'm 29 now, the youngest of 3 siblings, but some wounds from childhood still feel fresh. Elena, my oldest sister, has despised me for as long as I can remember. She didn't seem to have any issues with our middle sister, Terry. No, her hatred was reserved just for me. My earliest memories of Elena aren't filled with laughter or warmth, but with her mocking sneers and stinging insults. She was my first bully. As a teen, I found my voice, or at least tried to. I embraced punk clothes, dark eyeliner, and heavy metal, but even then, Elena couldn't resist tearing me down. Cruella strikes again. She'd cackle in front of my friends, her words sharp enough to cut through my carefully curated armor. At home, it was worse. She'd scream in my face over nothing, shove me against walls, or even sneak up behind me on the stairs, leaving me teetering between panic and fury. Our parents? Oh, they saw it. They saw all of it. But their go-to response was always, "Sisters fight. Just be patient with Elena, she's adjusting." Adjusting to what? My existence? Their complacency felt like betrayal, and I learned early that I'd have to fend for myself. When Elena finally moved out, I breathed for what felt like the first time in years. Terry became my lifeline, kind, supportive, everything Elena wasn't. She taught me how to do makeup, bought me my first pair of heels, and constantly reminded me I wasn't as unlovable as Elena wanted me to believe. But Elena hated that too. She'd berate Terry for being close to me, as though my happiness was a personal affront to her. I thought distance would ease the tension between Elena and me. I was wrong. When Elena got married, I genuinely hoped she'd find happiness and maybe, just maybe, leave me alone. But the moment my 21st birthday approached, I should have known better. A week before the celebration, Terry called me, her voice hesitant. "Elena's pregnant," she said. I felt a flicker of happiness for her, until my stomach twisted with a sickening realization. Elena hadn't announced it yet. I knew. I just knew. Sure enough, on the day of my birthday, Elena showed up wearing a tight-fitting shirt emblazoned with the words "New Mommy" in gold. My heart sank as she strutted into the room, soaking in the stunned looks from our family. My worst fears materialized when she beamed and declared, "We're having a baby." The room erupted into cheers. The candles on my untouched cake flickered, forgotten, as the celebration morphed into her moment. I tried to be gracious. I congratulated her, forcing a smile, but she didn't even look at me. She was too busy basking in the limelight, gushing to relatives about nursery plans and baby names. It felt like I'd been erased. Tears stung my eyes as I quietly slipped out the door, desperate for air. Terry followed me, her concern evident, but what could she say? She understood, but no words could undo the humiliation I felt. Later, when my parents questioned why I left, I told them the truth, only to be met with sharp disapproval. "Stop being childish," they scolded. "You should be happy for her." Happy? I was happy for her, just not for her choice to hijack my day. That's when I decided enough was enough. From that moment on, Elena wasn't welcome at my celebrations. But the story doesn't end there. Years later, when I was planning my wedding to Paul, I dreaded inviting Elena. I knew she couldn't resist trying to steal the spotlight again. My parents begged me, "What will the relatives think?" Reluctantly, I caved but warned them to keep her in check. Paul and I had saved every penny for our dream wedding. My dress was my crown jewel, $800 of intricate beading, delicate embroidery, and a skirt that flowed like a fairy tale. It wasn't extravagant by most standards, but to me, it was perfect. The only issue? It needed alterations, and I couldn't afford the steep prices. My Aunt Marie, ever generous, offered to help. I brought the dress to her house, the fabric shimmering under the light as she took my measurements. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, like a shadow creeping in at the edges of my happiness. When my aunt first agreed to alter my wedding dress, I could see the hesitation in her kind eyes, but she assured me she understood how precious it was. We spoke for a while, and I gently asked her not to share pictures of the dress with anyone. She smiled, placing a wrinkled hand over mine, and promised it would remain our little secret. A week passed with no word from her. At first, I told myself she was just busy, but as the days dragged on, an unease settled in my chest. I called her again and again, but there was no answer. Worry gnawed at me, each unanswered call like a weight pressing heavier on my heart. My aunt wasn't young. What if something had happened? Finally, unable to bear it, Terry and I drove to her house. When she opened the door, her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." "What happened?" I asked, my stomach twisting into a knot. She stepped aside, motioning us in. The air inside her house was heavy, tinged with the faint smell of lavender and something else, something bitter, like regret. She led us to her workroom. "Please don't hate me," she murmured, her hands shaking as she turned the doorknob. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. My wedding dress, my dream dress, was ruined. The bodice was ripped clean in half, beads scattered across the floor like shattered dreams. The skirt, once a cascade of delicate tulle, hung in tattered ribbons. I couldn't breathe. My knees buckled, and Terry had to steady me. "What, how," I choked out, the words catching in my throat. It was Elena," my aunt confessed, her voice barely audible. "Elena?" Terry and I echoed in unison. "She came by with her dogs," my aunt continued, wringing her hands. "I told her I was working on your dress, but when I stepped away to make her lunch, one of her dogs got into the room. I didn't know what to do. She begged me not to tell you." The room spun around me. "Her dogs?" I whispered, my voice shaking with disbelief. "I tried to fix it," my aunt sobbed. "But the material, it's so fine. It would cost more to repair than the dress itself." Terry's jaw tightened. "This doesn't make sense. How did the dog even get in? Wasn't the door locked?" My aunt nodded, her face crumpling further. "It was locked. But the door was open when I came back." A chill ran down my spine. My aunt's words settled heavily in the air, and the implication hit me like a punch to the gut. "She opened it," I murmured, the realization crashing down. "Elena let them in." The silence that followed was deafening. When I told my parents what had happened, they were quick to dismiss it. "It was an accident," my mother insisted. "You're being too harsh on Elena." But Terry didn't buy it. "We need to confront her," he said firmly. "If she did this on purpose, she has no business being part of your wedding." The next day, I invited Elena over to my parents' house under the guise of discussing wedding plans. She arrived all smiles, clearly thrilled to be included. The moment she walked in, I didn't waste time. "I know what you did," I said, watching her face closely. Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "Aunt told me everything," I said, crossing my arms. "The dress. The dogs. You." Elena's face paled. "It wasn't my fault," she blurted out. "My dogs must have snuck in. They're usually so well behaved." "Cut the crap," Terry snapped. "You expect us to believe this was an accident? Or are you just jealous?" "Jealous?" Elena's eyes widened. "Of her? Don't make me laugh. Why would I be jealous of someone who's had less than me her entire life?" My blood boiled. "Then why did you even look at my dress?" I asked coldly. Her eyes darted to the side. I didn't." "Funny," I interrupted. "You just said you didn't like my dress. How would you know that if you hadn't seen it?" My mother's gaze sharpened as she turned to Elena. "Answer her," she demanded. Elena's bravado cracked. Her lips trembled as tears welled up in her eyes. "Fine," she shouted. "I looked at it, okay? I hated how perfect it was." "How perfect you were." Her voice broke as she confessed, I couldn't stand the thought of you having the wedding of your dreams while I'm stuck in this miserable life. My father's face hardened. You let the dogs in, didn't you? Elena hesitated, then nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't think they'd destroy it that badly, she whispered. I just... Save it, I snapped, my voice cold as ice. You didn't just ruin a dress. You ruined everything. She looked at me, pleading. Please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. But I was done. You're not part of my wedding anymore, I said firmly. You don't get to take any more from me. As she stormed out, my parents sat in stunned silence, grappling with the truth about their eldest daughter. My aunt, guilt-ridden but relieved the truth was out, promised to help me find a new dress. And though the damage was done, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Sometimes, family isn't about blood, it's about who stands by you when everything falls apart. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, a warm hum of celebration as friends and family gathered for my son's first birthday. Balloons swayed gently in the air-conditioned breeze, and the sweet scent of vanilla frosting wafted from the towering cake adorned with delicate blue and white decorations. My husband and I exchanged a quick, excited glance as we began to carry the cake into the center of the room. This was a moment we'd been looking forward to, a pure milestone of joy in our little family's life. But then I saw her. Elena. She was standing by the DJ table, her fingers tapping nervously on the mic stand. My stomach tightened. Something about the way she lingered there, just out of place enough to catch my attention, sent an all-too-familiar chill down my spine. I wanted to shake off the unease. After all, we'd made so much progress over the past year. She'd been supportive, kinder, almost unrecognizable from the sister I'd grown up fearing and resenting. Just as the chorus of Happy Birthday began to rise, Elena grabbed the mic from the DJ. The music cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence that swept through the room like an icy wind. My breath hitched as I turned toward her, clutching the cake tray tightly as though it could anchor me to the moment. I have an announcement, she declared, her voice trembling slightly but firm enough to command attention. Every head turned her way. My dad froze mid-sip of his drink, his expression shifting from delight to confusion. My mom's smile faltered as she glanced nervously between Elena and me. Elena's lips curled into a proud smile as she said, I'm pregnant. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, and then added with a soft laugh, I've been waiting for the perfect moment to share the news. The perfect moment. Her words sliced through me like a cold blade. I felt the cake tray wobble in my hands, and my husband quickly steadied it, whispering, breathe. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. My son's first birthday, a day meant to celebrate his life and our journey as parents, had just been hijacked. Memories of my 21st birthday, where she'd pulled a similar stunt, crashed into my mind with cruel clarity. The room's initial cheer gave way to an awkward silence. People exchanged glances, unsure whether to clap or offer condolences for the tension now rippling through the air. My dad's face hardened, his jaw tightening as he processed what Elena had just done. My mom, ever the peacekeeper, forced a smile and clapped weakly. That's wonderful news, Elena, she said, her voice strained. Elena, oblivious to the discomfort she'd caused, strutted toward me with a triumphant air. You know, she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, since I've been there for you and your first baby, I'm hoping you'll return the favor and help me with mine. After all, that's what family does. I blinked, stunned. Did she really just make my son's birthday about her and issue a demand for my support in one breath? My chest tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. I set the cake down on the table with deliberate care, my hands trembling. Terry, ever my rock, stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. Not now, he murmured. It's your day. Don't let her ruin it. But it was too late. The mood had shifted. Guests whispered in hushed tones, stealing glances at me to gauge my reaction. My dad finally broke the silence, his voice low and firm. Elena, he said, this isn't the time or place for this. She turned to him, feigning innocence. What? I thought it would be nice to share happy news at a happy occasion. Her gaze flicked back to me, and I could see the faintest glint of satisfaction in her eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing. I took a deep breath, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "Elena," I said, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension, "this was supposed to be about my son. My baby's first birthday. Not about you. Not about your pregnancy. Just this once, could you not make it about yourself?" Her smile faltered, and for a moment, she looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't mean to," she began, but I cut her off. "Yes, you did." The words came out harsher than I intended, but they felt right. "You've been doing this my whole life, Elena. Every time something good happens for me, you find a way to overshadow it. I'm done letting you take away my moments." The room was dead silent. My mom opened her mouth to speak, but my dad held up a hand, his expression stern. "No," he said. "She's right. Elena, you owe your sister an apology. And not just for today." Elena's face flushed crimson. She looked around the room, perhaps hoping for an ally, but found none. Even Terry's gaze was icy as he stood by my side. Finally, she muttered, "I'm sorry," but the words were hollow, devoid of sincerity. "Save it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Just save it. If you can't genuinely be happy for me or my family, then maybe you shouldn't be part of our lives." The finality of my words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw something break in Elena's expression. Her bravado crumbled, leaving a flicker of vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. But it was too little, too late. The rest of the party passed in a blur. I plastered on a smile for my son's sake, but my heart ached with the weight of yet another betrayal. As the guests trickled out and the decorations were taken down, I found myself replaying the scene over and over in my mind, torn between relief and regret. Later that night, as I rocked my son to sleep, Terry sat beside me. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Sometimes, setting boundaries is the only way to protect yourself." I nodded, pressing a kiss to my son's forehead. For the first time in years, I felt a strange, bittersweet sense of peace. Maybe this was the end of Elena's disruptions, or maybe it was just the beginning of another chapter. Either way, I was determined to prioritize the happiness and stability of my own family, no matter what. The announcement hit me like a slap across the face. Elena's words echoed through the room, drowning out the cheerful hum of the party. She stood there, all smiles, acting as if this was her celebration, not my son's first birthday. Her voice was chipper, almost rehearsed. "I'm so thrilled to announce that we're expecting again." For a moment, the world stood still. I couldn't believe her audacity. The decorations, the cake, the balloons, it all felt like a mockery now. I glanced around, hoping someone else might voice the outrage bubbling inside me, but my family's faces reflected everything from awkward discomfort to forced smiles. Then, she turned to me and handed me a small envelope, her smirk widening like she was doing me a favor. "Here," she said lightly. "Just a few ideas for my baby shower. Can't wait to see what you come up with." I stared at the envelope, my fingers curling around it instinctively. Inside was a neatly handwritten list, complete with themes, color schemes, and catering preferences. The gall. The utter gall. My breath quickened, and years of frustration surged like a tidal wave, crashing into the carefully constructed wall I'd built to keep my composure intact. My hand trembled as I pulled the list out. For a second, I thought about stuffing it back in the envelope and walking away. But then, a voice inside me whispered, "Not this time." With deliberate precision, I began tearing the paper into strips, the sound of each rip louder than the chatter in the room. Gasps erupted around me as Elena's smirk dropped, her face frozen in a mix of disbelief and horror. "Elena," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Not this time." She blinked rapidly, as if trying to summon tears. And then they came, a torrent of dramatic sobs that drew every eye in the room. "Oh, come on," I muttered under my breath, but it was too late. My dad stepped in, his expression thunderous. "Elena's husband, take her home," he barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen one too many of these theatrics. My mom, of course, rushed to her defense. "She's just excited. She deserves to be part of this celebration too. She's his aunt, after all." I opened my mouth to retort, but Terry, my younger sister and perpetual peacemaker, cut in. She gave me a subtle nod, her way of saying, "I've got this." Without a word, she guided a still sniffling Elena toward the door. The room was silent now, save for the faint strains of the party music playing awkwardly in the background. I turned to my husband, hoping for a shred of understanding, but his expression was unreadable. "Really?" he said finally, his voice low but firm. "On his first birthday?" My stomach sank. He wasn't angry at Elena, he was angry at me. "She hijacked our son's party," I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. "And you tore her apart in front of everyone," he countered. "You think that didn't ruin the day for him, too?" The weight of his disappointment crushed me, but the anger still simmered beneath my skin. I wanted to explain, to make him see that this wasn't just about today, it was about every single time Elena had stolen the spotlight, chipped away at my self-worth, and left me humiliated. But he didn't wait for an explanation. "We'll talk later," he muttered, walking off to greet the remaining guests. The rest of the party dragged on like a bad dream. We cut the cake, we smiled for the photos, but the joy had been sucked out of the room. When the last guest left, the tension finally exploded. "You could have waited," he said during our argument later that night. "Waited until they were gone to confront her. Do you know what this looks like?" "Yes," I snapped. "It looks like I finally stood up to her." He didn't understand. How could he? He didn't grow up in the shadow of someone who constantly undermined him, who turned every milestone into a personal victory lap. I tried to explain it all, how Elena had humiliated me during my teenage years, ruined my 21st birthday, and even tore my wedding dress in a fit of jealousy. His eyes widened with each revelation, and I could see the pieces starting to click. "She's been doing this my whole life," I finished, my voice breaking. "And if I don't stop her now, she'll do it to our son too." His anger softened, replaced by something I hadn't expected, understanding. "Why didn't you tell me all of this before?" he asked quietly. "I didn't think it mattered," I admitted. "Until today." We sat in silence for a moment before he reached for my hand. "You're right. This can't keep happening. Not to you. Not to him." The relief was overwhelming. For the first time, I felt seen, not just by my husband, but by myself. The next day, he suggested we set boundaries with Elena. "We can't let her behavior become our son's burden," he said firmly. I nodded, knowing he was right. This wasn't just about standing up to Elena, it was about protecting my family, my peace, and my son's future. And as painful as it was to cut ties, I knew it was the only way forward. It started as a distant realization, one that gradually grew louder in my mind as I watched my son play with his father. My husband had noticed at first Elena's manipulative tendencies, and he was right. She wasn't just a problem for me anymore, she was a threat to the peaceful life we were trying to build for our child. I agreed wholeheartedly when my husband told me he didn't want our son around her. The decision was easy, yet it left an ache, a reminder of the bond one thought we once had. I was already planning to cut her off, I admitted to him that night, my voice steadier than I expected. But this time, it's final. She's done enough damage. I could feel the weight of my own words sinking into the quiet space between us. It was a relief, but it was also the start of an uphill climb. Elena hadn't taken the hint. Since the party, she'd been relentless, calling, texting, sending message after message that I refused to open. I didn't need to hear her excuses or apologies, and I certainly didn't want another twisted version of reality where somehow I was the villain. Not this time. No matter what she said, the damage was done. My thoughts raced back to the chaos of that day. My son's first birthday. A milestone meant to be filled with love and laughter, now forever stained by Elena's selfishness. Does she even regret it? I wondered bitterly. But deep down, I already knew the answer. Elena rarely regretted anything, except getting caught. This time was different. Forgiving her before had been foolish, yes, but letting her near my child? That was unforgivable. I made up my mind to block her for good. She would never again have the chance to infiltrate our lives. When I called my parents to break the news, I was ready for resistance. My dad, always the voice of reason, sighed heavily. I understand, sweetheart. After what she did, I can't blame you. But my mother's reaction was predictable. She gasped audibly over the phone, her voice thick with protest. You can't just cut off your own sister like this. Families have disagreements, but they don't abandon each other. Something inside me snapped, years of pent-up frustration spilling out like a dam finally breaking. You don't get it, do you? My voice shook, but I didn't stop. You've coddled her for years. She's your golden child, and you let her walk all over me. Every time she hurt me, you looked the other way. You could have stopped this, you could have been a parent, but you didn't. There was silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of my mother stifling a sob. I didn't let her pity derail me. If you respected me at all, you'd respect this decision. But if you keep pushing, if you keep siding with her, then I'll have no choice but to cut you off too. Her response was as expected, tears and pleas. She swore she could never live without her grandchild. I wanted to believe her apology, but the truth was bitter. It wasn't remorse for her actions, but fear of consequences that drove her words. I turned to my dad, calm but firm. For now, only you can see my son. Mom needs to figure out where she stands because, frankly, I'm done playing this game. The finality in my tone left no room for argument. Months passed. Elena stayed blocked, and the silence was liberating. Family events became a tightrope act. I ignored her presence, and she avoided me like I was a ticking bomb. Good. Even Terry, my other sister, saw through her facade. At first, she tried to keep the peace, but Elena's behavior soon turned on her too. The moment Terry cut her off, it felt like a small victory, proof that I wasn't crazy for standing my ground. Therapy became my sanctuary, a place to unpack years of pain I hadn't realized I carried. My therapist helped me see that this wasn't just about my sister, it was about reclaiming my sense of self. I learned that forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes, it's about forgiving yourself for tolerating the intolerable. Looking back at my son's birthday, I no longer felt ashamed of the scene I caused. If protecting my family made me the villain in someone else's story, so be it. I'd rather be the villain than allow more toxicity to creep into our lives. My husband stood by me through it all, his unwavering support a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. Together, we were building something Elena could never touch, a safe, loving environment for our son. As for my mother, her texts still come, laced with guilt and half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. I can't choose between my children, she writes. But that's the thing, no one asked her to choose. All I wanted was for her to stand up for me for once. Maybe she'll realize that one day. Or maybe she won't. Either way, I've made my peace. For now, life is quieter. The absence of Elena's chaos feels like stepping into fresh air after years in a smoke-filled room. My focus is where it should be, on the family I'm building, not the one I've left behind. In the end, life is all about the boundaries we set and the people we allow to shape our world. Cutting ties isn't always easy, especially when it's family, but sometimes protecting our peace means making the hardest decisions. Whether it's standing up for yourself, prioritizing your loved ones, or simply choosing happiness over chaos, these moments define who we are. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If you've faced similar challenges or have thoughts on this story, share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories that make you think, feel, and reflect. Until next time, take care of yourselves and those who truly matter.